All right, I've got a follow-up for you on what I'm calling the God math discovery of the NAND gates, how they are the underlying fundamental mechanism that can be used to recreate all of the basic mathematical functions, including sine and cosine and log and square roots, etc. And they can be used to express pi, for example, and some other interesting constants. This is a fundamental and profound discovery. And it's one that, in retrospect, perhaps should have been obvious. I'm curious why nobody came up with this before. But that's the way discoveries often work. It seems obvious in the rear view mirror, but yet it was brilliant to have the insight and to do the research and make it happen. And I also want to apologize to the author. Look, I don't speak Polish, and his name is a Polish name, and I mistakenly thought maybe it was Ukrainian or Russian. That's my fault. He's Polish, all right? So let's give Poland some credit where it's due. And I don't recall his name right now, or I would try to pronounce it, but nevertheless, what this paper shows, and if you missed it, you should check out my amazing infographic at naturalnews.com, where I published an article about this. And I posted that infographic on social media, and I found that a lot of scientists are reposting that graphic because it's so compelling. It shows that the NAND gate is the underlying fundamental architecture of distributed intelligence. Well, maybe you could say distributed compute across our entire simulated cosmic reality. So that's a very interesting infographic, and it reminds me that there are two responses to this story. Two responses. One response, which I've seen on social media, is people saying, this is the most boring science paper ever. I don't know why anybody is interested in this so-called discovery. This is stupid. All right, so that's what some people say. And then the other response is, oh my God, this is one of the most amazing things ever to be discovered in math, and this is absolutely huge. And that's my response. Again, when I saw this discovery and I started reading the paper, I got chills. It was, even thinking about it right now, it's stunning. So what's the difference between these two responses? Well, it's very simple. The people with the first response just don't understand what it is. That's all. Those who understand this are mesmerized by it. They're blown away by it. And let me just restate it here in case you missed my 40-minute podcast, which admittedly started out with some storytelling about my college days and how I started out as an electrical engineer, which, the reason I brought that up is because we're talking about NAND gates. That's not and, or N-A-N-D, NAND gates, which are part of computer science, logic gates, Boolean logic, etc. And I knew that because I had sat through, electrical engineering classes when I was a freshman in college. And we had to design, circuits on paper. Like, you had to throw a bunch of gates together on paper. Those were the early days. But anyway, the reason this is so profound is because it shows that computational intelligence is so widely distributed across our cosmos that it is present in everything. It's present in physical matter. It's present in light, where you have polarization of light representing the states of true and false, or 1 and 0, just based on polarization. And also in neurology and biology, including E. coli. I talked about in my podcast how E. coli can actually express NAND logic. So yeah, you can engineer logic gates into microbes and probably yeast and neurology and everything else. And the table of elements itself is a computational representation of, you could call it the intelligence of energy pretending to be matter, And again, I'm oversimplifying. This is not a science paper here. This is a podcast, so I'm kind of breezing through a number of subjects here. But the point is that the fact that there is one single operator that is the underlying substrate infrastructure of the computational nature of our cosmic simulation is extraordinary. It means that out of this one function, all the complexity of the world that you know came into existence. That's why I call it God math. It's the math of the creator. And it is distributed into everything. In one way or another, it's distributed into everything, into matter, into light, into, I believe, even elements of consciousness, and certainly elements of biology and neurology and so on. So that means that this math is also happening at the atomic level. It's happening at the chemical level. And by the way, we know this. I mean, if you study subatomic physics and so on, you know that what's happening is math. I mean, probability and, the collapse of probability waves. And we can get into, the observer effect and so on. And you can get into spin states and quantum phenomena. And, the list just keeps on going, faster than light, teleportation of information through the superposition states of, subatomic particles, whatever. You get into all this stuff. The truth is that computational intelligence is so basic and so widespread, and yet gives rise to so much complexity in our world, including the complexity that defines your physical being. Your brain is fundamentally made of the same basic logic expressed through biology. Your body, again, elements of your consciousness are expressed through this same fundamental principle. So in other words, if you're the engineer of the cosmos, you didn't have to actually create a bunch of unique, complex atomic mathematical functions. All you had to do was create basically one function and then just start combining it in creative ways. And that's it. So, and again, this is an oversimplification, but I'm saying that the entire universe, what we see as matter and light and biology, may be based on simply a single underlying logic function, or at least can be expressed with one single underlying logic function. This is like the unified field theory solved for math. And remember, the unified field theory was never actually solved. So, so the physicists haven't quite figured out how to equate electromagnetism with gravity and other forces, what used to be called strong and weak nuclear forces, etc. I'm not a physicist, but I don't think that there's one unified equation that describes everything in physics. I'm pretty sure that hasn't been found yet, although Einstein was working on it. But there has been now one universal little bit of logic that describes almost everything in mathematics, nearly everything. I'm not even sure what's excluded from it at this point. I'm going to have to study a little bit more on this and read some of the follow-up articles and notes, etc. Maybe talk to some actual professional mathematicians, from academia, and ask them some questions about this. But this is like the unified field theory of math. That's why it's a big deal. And it shows that you are part of it. So in other words, it also reveals that God is not some being that sits above everything, that God already infused himself into everything. So the God math, that is the creation math of our cosmos, is already within every cell in your body. It's in every neuron. It's in every molecule. It's in every atomic nucleus that exists everywhere on the planet. So God is literally everywhere, and God has already gifted everything with the power of computation and creation, which I believe is it's the infrastructure substrate of the entire cosmic simulation. We are living in a self-calculating, self-rendering simulation. How about that? And the simulation itself renders the parts that it needs when you're watching. That's why the observer collapses the probability wave into an observable state because it only renders what it needs to render. Doesn't render everything all the time. Why would it? I mean, that would be inefficient for a self-computing, self-resolving cosmic simulation. So there you go. I encourage you to check out my infographic on this, read my article at naturalnews.com. And also, if you want to hear my original podcast, I go into a lot more detail of this. The same concepts here, but a lot more detail. And some storytelling, too, about my early college days. You may or may not be interested in that, and that's totally fine. Basically, I skipped a lot of class for the first year because I was in the wrong major. I was in electrical engineering, and that's not where I was meant to be. So that changed after the first year. Anyway, thank you for listening. I'm Mike Adams here. You can find more of my podcasts at brightvideos.com and also all my articles and infographics at naturalnews.com. Thank you for your support. Take care.
Biostructured silver gel deserves a spot in your emergency bug-out bag. It's made with 3 types of silver, 7 powerful essential oils, and lab-tested for glyphosate, heavy metals, and microbiology. Get yours at healthrangerstore.com.